So, all right, guys. I think I'm going to start with my session now. Okay, to start it off, I really love my mom. And, oh yeah, thank you for that. And I really love her because she taught me really many things, like brushing my teeth, going to school, doing my homework, stuff like that. And yeah, also cleaning up my room. And you know, I have a problem with cleaning up my room. I always had. And when I thought about doing this talk, I thought cleaning up your room has a lot to do with configuration files you handle every day when you have a Symfony project. So I'm Dennis. I'm from Germany. And being from Germany does not include speaking like this real German. I like your accent you guys have in America, so I kind of copy that. So hopefully it doesn't sound that sloppy, but yeah. I'm a software developer at SymfonyLive Germany, which includes coaching, training, and consulting, for example. And during consulting, I saw all this stuff I'm going to talk about today. And yeah, coming back to the thing, if you go to my home, you're going to see something like that. That's the desktop of my girlfriend. And yeah, it's pretty clean. You know, she's going to be a lawyer, so having a clean desktop is one of the key features you have to do if you want to be something like that. But if you see my desk, for example, it looks like that. And you now see I'm really into music. So I do all this old school time hip-hop stuff with my drum machine and stuff like that. So if you want to chat about old school hip-hop, you can do that with me, not crunk shit. I don't like that. And yeah, having a desk like that is similar to having a configuration file like that. And you know, this is a configuration file I had in a client project, and it was way longer. It was like 300 lines of code or so, 300 lines of configuration or so. And I think you guys even managed to see a file like that longer. And you know, there's several problems with a configuration file like that. Because if you split it down to that and just focus on the small things I've got here for you, you lose context, for example. So if you have an config YAML file like that, you have, for example, parameters context. And I see some people do that they put everything in the parameters context. So, you know, you really lose context in that. So you have no structure. You can't really tell where a configuration options belongs to. And you have so many other things, like, is it the correct type you have here? Because this should be an integer, but it's a string actually. So is your PHP code can it really work with that? You don't know. You can't tell. So you need some kind of validation in that. Or for example, is this only this bundle that's happening in this block that someone put over there? So someone was kind enough to add a comment, for example, but you know, it's like with real code. You add a comment somewhere, 2 months later, someone other added something on the bottom of it, and it's not the context anymore. So you still lose the context over time. So kind of strange if you only put it in blocks and rely on comments, for example. That doesn't work out very well very often. And for example, if you kind of get into a project, you've never been there, and you try to guess, for example, how can I configure multiple connections here? You kind of can get a clue how to do that. And you know, that's really hard at this place without having a structure that's given to you. So when we break it down to this, with all these information in there, you still lack the kind of guessing how you can do that. You know, that's something Fabiano talked about in his session that was right before mine, that you kind of have a hard time to get into it. And we all want to get into a project really quick, and things like this stop us with that. Bless you. And there's some other thing. For example, if you have correct keys in there in your configuration file, and this can get really nasty. I have an example on this later on, which really sucked. And yeah, so making a hard statement on this, what we want is we want more structure in it at first. So we get more structure like this, for example, and we want to go there over my session or during my session. And you see, now you have some structure in here, and you want to have it like that, but still you have problems with that. So it's not the correct type. It's a string, for example, and it's not a Boolean. And some libraries or your code, if it relies on Booleans or kind of relies on the type juggling PHP does for you, it can get really nasty finding out errors, for example. And so you need validation. And validation is one of the key things I'm going to talk today. I'm going to talk about today. So making a hard statement, bad configuration is worse than bad code in terms of structure. So kind of getting my neck out here. But the thing is, if you don't have any if you don't have a bad configuration, it's compared to, for example, reading a text. You don't want to read a text that's written in, let's say, that's written in a font that you can't read, and you have it in a bad structure. Everything is dangling around everywhere, and you can't read it, so you skip the text. But with configuration files, we open these configuration files day after day. We just open them, and we kind of accept that it's God-given that they are ugly, not well-structured, stuff like that. So, yeah, we want to ease that. And we also have bad validation in there. And that's even worse, because, yeah, you should see it in my example that's later on. So, in this example, you might guess what's happening here, but that was actually something that really happened to one of our customers where I was working. So what happened here is someone misspelled redirect. And as you can see, it kind of defined that all the redirects have to be a 302 redirect. And in the code, it had some check. If it's set to something else in the HTTP status codes, it's going to be like that. If not, it's 301. And you might guess what happened. All redirects were 301 redirects. So the SEO guy, he was nearly crying. And that's just for a typo. No validation at all. And nobody really recognized it because of some other problems. They had actually no real logging in their project, so kind of bashed them for that too. But with this happening, you don't actually see that things like this can affect your software if you don't have any validation, for example. So we kind of want to fix that. And thanks to the config component that's shipped with Symfony, you can actually handle all these stuff, or all this stuff, and kind of get it the right way. So the config component consists of 4 main topics. You can say that. The first one is locating stuff, locating configuration files, loading them, validating them, and caching them. We're going to focus today on only the first 3 of them, because caching is already done for you in Symfony, and it's a bit hidden for you, and you don't need to take care of that. If you want to use the config component yourself, you can dive into it, but it's not that hard. So focusing on locating and loading first, we're going to see how files can be located and found and loaded. So imagine a code snippet like that. So you have a file locator that's shipped with the config component. You can pass multiple resource paths to the file locator. And then you can say, OK, locate my file. And it's called config.xml. It's going to search in the path, in the resource path you passed in this example. And if it finds it, it returns you the path where it actually found it. So every time it returns you the first path it finds. So if you have multiple files that has a name like that, you kind of get the first one that's found. And then if you take a look at your Symfony project, for example, you're working with that every day, I hope. So we have some Drupal guys here working not every day with Symfony 2. Yeah, Larry, I know you. Except Larry? Someone? Drupal? Oh, cool, guys. So if you have the extension over here that's shipped with every bundle. So if you use the generation console commands, it's not tasks anymore. If you use the generation command for it, so you have an extension class that's already generated for you. And in there, you find something like that. And that's a special loader that's in here. So you remember the thing we saw in a few slides before that you have a loader. And this loader is a special one because it interacts with the dependency injection container. So it kind of loads. It's specialized to loading configuration files that are specific for services. And it loads the definition of it into the dependency injection container and prepares everything to you. And that's why you have the container, for example, passed to it. And there you can say, OK, let's load this. And it's going to load it into the DIC. That's what I said before. And in there, in this file, you can define your services, for example. I think you're pretty used to that, defining your services in the DIC and doing stuff like that. But what you can do, what most people don't do, is you can split it up and you can split up your services in multiple service files, for example. And you can do some nice stuff with that because we see it later on. So next one is validating configuration files, and that's where it gets funny, I'd say. So imagine you have a config YAML like that, and you want to have, for example, a Boolean switch that tells you, OK, I want to enable my bundle or I don't want to enable it. So imagine a bundle that does some CMS stuff, for example, or a block. So you want to turn the switch on and your block is enabled, or you want to turn it off and it's off. Comes in pretty handy sometimes. So what you have here, or what you want here, is your bundle context. You're going to have it in there, and you only have the configuration that's for this bundle in this context. So you don't have it in this parameters context anymore, and it's not spread over and over. So going back to your extension class that you have in your bundle already, you have this load method. And this load method does some crazy things for you. And what it actually does is it gets past this configs array. So this is the configuration options you've seen before in the context. And it's already matched for you, but it's not processed. So there can still be the typos in it, and it's not validated and stuff like that. So don't rely on that one. But you can still look into it if you want to. I haven't found a use case for that, but you can if you want. But don't rely on that. And then it gets processed by the process configuration method. We're going to dive into what happened in there later on. And after that, you get back the processed and validated options. And with these options, you can work, because now they have the correct type and stuff like that. So you can access, for example, the enabled switch, and it's a Boolean now. So you can be sure that everything is validated for you now, and you can work with that. So making this simple in one statement, what's actually happening in the config component is you turn a configuration file, which could be YAML, PHP, for example, or XML, or whatever you want if you write something for that, and converts and validates it into actually PHP code for you. So you get back what's actually in there in this configuration structure in PHP, so you can work with that. So now we come to see configuration trees. And configuration trees are, I like them. And when I did this session in London, some people said it is quite ugly, but I kind of like it. So the thing is, it's in your configuration class. So it's still shipped with your bundle. You can find it there, and it's pretty easy to find it. And within that file, you already have generated this PHP code. And it has a configuration tree. And that is an object that gives you a domain-specific language with what you can work and configure how your configuration structure should look. So that's the case why it's named config tree, because you build the config tree for your config structure, for example. So you define your root node in it, and it's already defined for you. And if you want, for example, something like that, you have to add code like this. And it's pretty simple. It looks a bit strange at the beginning, but it's pretty simple if you get used to it. And yeah, we kind of dive into it. So what you first have to do always is to define the node type you want to have in your configuration. So you have, for example, a node type that's Boolean here. So it already gets validated for you. So if you put a string in it, you get a nasty error saying okay, I expected it to be a Boolean, but you put in a string. Take a look at that. You provide the node name for it. That's pretty straightforward. And you can say you want a default, you want more options for it. And here I said I wanted to default to false. So my bundle should be off every time I don't configure anything else which is true in this case. Yeah, but looking at that, I always feel like that. You know, taking a look back at it, PHP is a C-based language, so domain-specific languages in PHP look like that all the time. I mean, you don't have this slick, cool, funny, and kind of awesome language like Ruby, for example, or JavaScript that can look like, oh yeah, I heard that. That can look awesome. But it's really, dive into the API, and you're going to see that this API is really rich, and it can provide you with many helpful things. And after time, you're gonna see over all these strange children and AND methods and stuff like that, and you're going to start maybe copying stuff from one place to another. But it's really, this API is still very helpful for you. So you've seen that you have nodes, for example, Boolean nodes. And we have different node types in the configuration component. And I'm going to show you the most important three of them. That's Boolean. You saw that before. Scalar. So that's all scalar variables. And you have arrays. Arrays are really important if you have connection data, for example. I show you something about Booleans now, again. So you know that. But maybe you have some smartass doing something like this. And you know, the good thing is now we have validation enabled. You're going to get an error saying to you, OK, you passed something that should be a Boolean, but you passed a string. So you can rely that everything works for you. So that's good at that point. OK, scalar nodes, for example, are everything that's not a Boolean or an array. That was pretty smart. So if you have, for example, want to configure a timeout or the 302 HTTP status, you can put it like that, and you want to have it like that in a configuration file. You can use something like this. So you define a scalar node, and you have these validation options you put here. OK, I know these validations options don't make any sense, but I just wanted to show you a few of them, because you know we have a default value, and we say it is required and cannot be empty. Yeah, I know. Maybe we should add something that says that tells you that these validation options won't work out. But I just wanted to showcase. So if you have a smart guy doing something like that, and yeah, some of you are smiling now, but I saw that in a project. Been there, really. I saw that. You know, people in Germany do crazy things. But if you have something like that, you don't want that to happen. So the thing is, scalar can be everything. You know, it can be a string or it can be an integer. So you have to add the validation yourself, and you have the possibility to do that with the validate method you have in this domain-specific language in the config tree. So you can add your custom validation into it, and say, for example, I have this validation logic in here, which you can pass a closure. And that's the thing, because I had someone asking in London, if you have closures all over the place, you're going to be copying the same validation code over and over and over and over again, because they're closures. And I said, OK, yeah, maybe you can use something else. But yeah, you can only use closures in it. But there's some, I kind of made some easing made something out to ease this. I used closures for that. And I used the assert library from Benjamin Eberle. You know that guy? Who doesn't know him? Benjamin? Oh, you all know him. So you don't know him? OK, he's the guy who's working at Doctrine. So you know Doctrine? OK. So he created this assertion library that you can use, for example, to not have unequal is integer. So you kind of don't have to copy that anymore, or you can at least put something of this in your in a class, for example, and make it a static method. But you know, static methods feel kind of sloppy if you use them in a context like that, so a bit strange. But you can still use it for simple validation. And that's what you should do. Don't do very crazy validation in that. You just want simple validation on one variable, and that's it. And you know, it only focuses on this specific variable that you configured. So you can, for example, validate this variable and the variable next to it. So you can say, OK, I want the username to be validated like that, or for example, I want 2 passwords in it. You can't do it. So it's only focused on the one variable that you get passed. And also to having your own validation logic, you can also pass a custom error to it. So if you have an error message that's something like that, it's OK. But you know, pass an error message that's good enough to find it again, because you know, if you get an exception like that and it says no integer, it's like doing empty catch blocks in your code. It's not that you can't find it. So provide a good validation error for everything. So on array nodes, They come in handy if you have, for example, I said that database connection configuration. So if you have something like that in your configuration and you want to configure the configuration for an API, for example, that you're going to access, you have to use something like that. So you say, okay, it's an array node I want to have here. And you can put multiple definitions of nodes in there for every single node that's going to be underneath the connection node, for example. So you can go down as deep as you want, and the code blows up, but you still can do it. And you can still provide specific validation for every node you define. So you have validation just for this URL Scalar node, for example. And what comes back from the configuration, from the config component, is an array like that. So you can work with that, and you can pass it, for example, to your API or to your PHP code, or you can pass it to the DIC if you want that. And we're going to go into this later on. And if you have, for example, multiple connections where you want a fallback one, you have to use something very special. And here you see why the domain-specific language doesn't look that cool, because it kind of blows up very quickly because you just want to do something simple. But yeah, work with it. The API is still blowing. So you have something like that. You define, okay, I have this array node, and then you say, okay, I want to prototype a variable or a node. And you say, okay, I want to prototype an array node that's underneath my connections node. And there you can say, okay, that's the prototype type of multiple connections that can be underneath it. So you can repeat it many times. And you also can add prototype validation or validations to this prototype. So you can say, for example, if you have connection configuration, I want to have at least one configuration for that. So you don't accidentally have someone who doesn't configure your connection configuration. And the config component then returns something like that, which you can work with again. Okay. So now that we got over all this definition stuff, we're going to dive into how to use this configuration, because that's something many people having for example, an Symfony 1 background still kind of not do wrong, but they apply Symfony 1 things that are not useful in Symfony 2 anymore. So if you have, for example, something like that, you remember that from earlier on where we said, okay, we want to have this Boolean switch. And here, for example, you can use this switch to say, okay, I want the DIC loader to actually load the services. So if you have, for example, this enabled switch, you can pass out all service definitions if it's not true, for example, which comes in handy if you have services that you don't want to have in any deployment, for example. Or you have a bundle that has extra services in it. So you have, for example, these base services that get served every time you enable the bundle, and you have extra services that only get enabled if you really want them. So you can split your services up to multiple service definition files, and say, for example, okay, I want this split up, and every time someone says, okay, add extras true, you can load them. And actually, what you can do then in your bundle extension class is you can say something, okay, container set parameter, and set a parameter of your bundle in the for the DIC, which you then can use in your services. So you have the ability to manipulate all these parameters that you defined for your services and kind of build a bridge here from your config.yaml file to the services. And sometimes I see people doing this. And it's kind of okay. I mean, it's in the documentation and it's okay. I mean, you can use that for many stuff. That's perfectly fine if you do that. And as you can see, it's in a controller file, for example. So if you use that in your controller, I'm fine with that. But, going back to crazy things that German people do, I saw people actually passing the container to, for example, entity files or entity classes to access parameters like that, or your model classes. So people actually pass the container into a model class to get access to this parameter, which is not very good. Because, where it is. It's like that. So who remembers this times? Symfony 1 times? Oh, some Symfony 1 users in the US. That's good. So, there's a problem with that, with this in specific, because it's static. So you have coupled everything with that now. So sfconfig is now coupled with, for example, if you use it in your entity class with your entity. So every time you want to test it, sfconfig has to be loaded. That was a big problem in Symfony 1. And, we had worse examples of that. So we had a saying for Symfony 1, if you use something like that, every time a kitten gets killed. And I don't want to get back to this times in Symfony 2. So contrary to that, the good old Symfony times. Contrary to that, you should configure your services, not global options. You should always prefer to configure your services. So you saw the example I used before. So what you want to do now is kind of use the extension classes to build a bridge between your configuration that you're offering to everyone else in your project and your services. So kind of abstract the configuration of your services down to or up to config.yaml files. So what you want to do is not something like that. You want to do something like that. And you want to set the parameter, for example, that you got from your config.yaml file. And you have, for example, something like that in your services definition. So if you look at the top, you have this config option you set before in your extension class, and you're using it as an argument of your service. So you kind of bridged it out to the config YAML file, and now it's more like hidden somewhere, but you kind of got the validation for it, so nothing can go wrong anymore in terms of validation if you do your validation right. So you kind of made it easier to access the configuration now. So it's hopefully easier to configure your services. And you should consider always to go from configure your services via the parameters context in your config.yaml file to making configuration structures more accessible in this specific file and passing it back down to your service definitions. So you also gain stuff like you can test it more easy. You can integrate it in other projects, for example. We are talking about code reusage here and stuff like that. So it gets really easier to kind of reuse your code. Because if you have something like the container in it that gets passed, for example, in your model classes or service classes or whatever you want to call it, it kind of gets really nasty to strip it out sometime and use it in another project because now you rely on the Symfony container. which is a cool thing. I like it because I work at SymfonyLive, but you know, using the container all the time is not very good. And relying on that is even worse. So you want to do something like that in the end in your extension class. So it gets really easy now to make a bridge. OK, so let's recap some things that I was talking about today during my session. Configuration needs structure. So you need to structure your configuration, give it some context, and make it easier for people coming into the project. Because you know, if I don't remember the code I wrote last week because I'm pretty lazy about things like that. And that's the same for configuration. I mean, it's even worse there. But getting a clue what configuration means and getting easier into it because you don't have an IDE telling you, OK, that method means this because it's a configuration option. So you don't have any IDE options there. It's kind of heavy. So giving it more structure and more context makes it easier for everyone. Configuration needs validation because of the several reasons I said before. If you don't have validation, people do crazy things, not only in Germany. And configuration needs conversion. So you don't really want to rely on your configuration that's in your config YAML file just getting passed down to your services directly because you want it to convert it to the right options. So yeah. And there's one thing you guys have to, I wish you do. You know, if you don't have gotten anything out of here for today, and you think I'm just a German jerk that's copying your slang, that's OK for me. I'm perfectly fine with that. But, you know, please, please don't leave your configuration files like that. So thank you, everyone.